So, hi everyone, and firstly, I hope you and your loved ones are all well and safe. And also thank you, Richard, for your introduction. So having accepted the invitation and agreed to talk about economy and architecture, it was difficult to know exactly where to start and what to cover. It's such a huge topic, as I think is beginning to dawn on us. So over the course of the next 30 minutes or so, I'll try to discuss the importance of measurement in all of this. And apologies if it's a bit heavy, kind of kicking things off. But I will start by looking at historic forms of measurement and attempts to create a universal system of measurement to develop a common understanding, facilitate trade, and ultimately the creation of nation states and global capitalism that we're surrounded by today. I will then go on to discuss their legacy and limitations, speaking to the need to redress an imbalance in the way we perceive and value the built environment, promoting a complementary system of measurement based on ethics, in the hope that we might build a new consensus around which to rally in addressing how, what, where, when, and for whom we build. I will conclude by attempting to build bridges between contemporary discussions on the green economy, sharing economy, diversity, equality, affordability, and so on, to talk about the need for investment in a single ethical economy, in which we are properly equipped as a society to identify and do the right thing, given the scale of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead of us. So to begin with, I wanted to talk about the vast array of different systems of measurement, which it's easy to forget about, as we're usually brought up learning and adopting a single system, national and international standard. And as there's limited time, I will focus on a few that resonated with me as an architect and are emblematic of a broader point that I want to make, in that the way we measure affects the way we perceive, understand, organize, and shape the environments and societies in which we live. It is not as neutral as we may first believe. So the first of these is the ancient Egyptian cubit rod. The rod was drawn from the proportions of the human body, with each rod measuring approximately 52.5 centimeters. It was divided into 7 palms, with each palm consisting of 4 fingers, which were then further subdivided. My interest here as an architect is in the directness between a system of measurement and the human body, which is essential in enshrining the human scale to our built environment to make it relatable. And sometimes this is altogether easy to forget when commissioning and designing buildings. It's almost as important to remember that this measurement was therefore tied to the bodies of a certain population, the Egyptians, and its utility must be read through that cultural lens. The furlong is interesting because it was the distance that a team of oxen could plow a field without resting. So here, it was not only tied to a specific act, but implied a link between the setting out of property, the physical and psychological state of the oxen, their exhaustion, the passage of time, and potential earnings. History is littered with such examples of corporeal systems of measurement that have been eclipsed by the universal metric and also imperial units. In 1668, John Wilkins wrote an essay towards real character and philosophical language, in which he proposed one of the earliest decimal systems of measurement linking length, area, volume, and mass. In his proposal, he used the beat of a pendulum as the basis for a fundamental measurement of length. Wilkins' proposal therefore seemed prophetic given our current understanding of a unified space-time. But this was almost immediately superseded by Gabriel Mouton, who tied the fundamental unit of measurement to the circumference of the Earth and gave birth to the metric system of measurement. The pursuit of a universal metric measurement and set of common standards to facilitate trade, communication, collaboration, and understanding had necessitated the splintering of measurement from any individual and cultural subjectivity and specificity, and therefore also a potentially personal and alternative understanding of scale. So not only an understanding of how big things are, but also why they're that big and what it relates to. The successes of these standards are huge and well documented, accounting for their widespread adoption. It not only facilitated academia, trade, and collaboration, but also development of national identities, states, and the global form of capitalism and international politics that we see today. These standards touch almost every aspect of our lives, and yet we often find it difficult to comprehend their meaning and power. In their universality, they are almost so abstract that they are scaleless and unrelatable, untethered from the reality of our day-to-day. And it is important to note that their arrival and development is not without shortcomings, precisely due to their reductive and abstract nature and bias towards the commodification and financialization of value and values, which is a topic I will return to. In architecture, the influence of these standards is both profound and everyday. We use them to coordinate the delivery of projects at almost every stage. And one such example where the spatial, constructional, and financial measures of a project meet is in the cost plan. A document that accompanies almost every project, establishing its feasibility and apportioning of budgets in line with current market conditions, accounting for things like the price of goods, labor, risk, and profit. The cost plan is no doubt an essential tool in the delivery of fiscally responsible buildings through processes such as value engineering. And as with all tools, it can be incredibly useful and powerful, yet also risks skewing the decision-making process and the ability to identify where true value lies. Its utility is contingent on the skill of the user or users to fully comprehend the summative information presented, but crucially also to understand what is missing from it or implied, and to be able to properly connect and communicate this to one another so that everyone is on the same page. It takes a small leap of the imagination to realize its potential in summarizing pertinent issues in one place, if we could combine it with other costs to the project, such as embodied carbon. That said, it is important to recognize that it is easiest to make this leap when the cost is quantifiable. But what about those costs that are indivisible, such as weighing up complex cultural and ethical arguments? How does one measure two seemingly unconnected things against one another in deciding how to proceed? For example, our human rights, maybe in terms of labor conditions, against the price of steel. The value in value engineering and the cost in cost plan are terms that I'd like to return to, notwithstanding an appreciation of the bottom line when resources are scarce and we must all be resourceful. But hopefully you can grasp my broader point about the limitations of weighing the value and cost of a project through the singular lens of a universal system of measurement that was designed against a different backdrop, removing measurement from its cultural siting and specificity. We now need a bespoke solution that is able to measure up to the challenges of our era. In recognition of this disconnect between this abstract unit of measurement and our humanity, there have been innumerable studies and guides to help designers embed human experience back into their design. Over time, these studies have evolved to shape a complex appreciation of our rights. Our cities now evolve based upon a current understanding of how our spaces are used and the resultant critical dimensions and construction. For example, with housing, in aiming to safeguard a minimum quality of life, government design guides and policy tend to assume the number, type, scale of, and space around furniture, to establish a set of space standards and accommodate different demographics. It's curious to think that furniture not only governs how we live together, but through its dimension and relation to the human body, has also become a fundamental building block of our cities and a measure of our rights to them. We size our homes around what we have agreed we're each entitled to own as a base standard. But who is the we in all of this? Who gets to decide how we live? How do they adjust for cultural specificity and sensitivity in developing these standards, thinking back to the cubic rod? How are they qualified to make such judgments and speak for all groups and not just a majority? How do they stand up for marginalized voices? It is important to recognize the utility, but also the absurdity of the universal metric system and its resulting standards. We must remember that people misbehave. We stand on chairs, sit on bollards, sleep on sofas, and work in baths. We are all opportunists who co-opt the things around us for different uses beyond their original intention. We routinely misuse our furniture and the spaces we reside in. We must recognize that different people and cultures have evolved different cultural norms which affect the design of the spaces in which they reside. If we can recognize that we are all different and our needs are different, what does this mean in relation to an understanding of our common rights and the development of standards? How do we negotiate this bewildering set of figures and numbers to create places we all want to live in and places that can represent us all? How do we as individuals plant ourselves within these abstract measures and grow as people as well as societies? In this regard, I thought I'd share two further references that I enjoy. The first is Richard Long's Dusty Boots line Sahara, where the very notion of measurement becomes biographical. It documents the ephemeral trace of a walk, which Long described as a measure of the land itself, its size, shape, and terrain, and also of myself, how long it takes me and not someone else. And the second is Duchamp's Three Standard Stoppages, which beautifully illustrates the absurdity of the metric system. He dropped 3 1-meter lengths of string to carve the profile of 3 1-meter curved wooden rules that aim to preserve the forms obtained by chance without losing their identity as a meter, casting doubt on whether the straight edge is always the most efficient route from one point to another. So where am I going with all of this? Well, in the pursuit of efficacy and the creation of value, we have untangled our appreciation of the built environment from the complex web of ethics that should bind it together. To redress this balance, we need to strengthen an approach to architecture that isn't just about how a neighborhood looks and feels, but also who and what it stands for. And this is possibly rooted in one of the oldest discourses in architecture, that of representation. We find ourselves in a state of confusion given the scale of the challenges in the world, and can learn from the development of universal systems of measurement to help build a consensus around which we can rally to change the culture of building, sooner rather than later, a complementary unifying measure. This problem is shared in economics when measuring the progress and success of an economy. Michael Sandel, the Harvard law professor and political philosopher, explains that putting a price on every human activity erodes the moral and civic goods worth caring about. We therefore need a public debate about where the markets serve the public good and where they don't belong. Deciding which social practices should be governed by market mechanisms requires a form of economic reasoning that is bound up with moral reasoning. He goes on to argue that mainstream economic thinking asserts its independence from the contested terrain of moral and political philosophy. The classical economists, going back to Adam Smith, conceived of economics as a branch of moral and political philosophy. In essence, measuring the success of an economy should not be tied to price, but a more fundamental pursuit of societal value. Price fluctuates according to prevailing market conditions, which can be divorced from reality and the fundamental value of the goods and services being traded. So we have to find and bolster an alternative understanding of and discussion around value, which reflects the needs of the societies and ecosystems that we serve. We cannot let universal forms of measurement passively determine the form of our environment when so much is at stake. We cannot ignore the hidden costs for things that we do not price when deciding on all of our futures. Any attempt to measure or search for a better measurement cannot be a value-neutral act. It must be underpinned by the ethics we collectively hold in relation to human behavior and social choice. So what can we do? We need to come together and look at the whole system of building to help navigate this moral maze. There is urgency, expertise, and momentum building to address issues of sustainability, diversity, affordability, safety, durability, labor conditions, and so on. However, it's important to recognize that these are not siloed issues to be tackled separately, but a single issue that has arisen from neglecting our moral obligations, and a single issue necessitating cultural reform right across the building industry, from clients, architects, consultants, contractors, suppliers, and users. We must consolidate and weigh ethical arguments in measuring the cost and value of the built environment if we are to properly cater for the planet, its diverse communities, and natural habitats. In this final section, I will try to identify what such a unifying measure might look like when applied to architecture. Although this is, of course, a mammoth undertaking in itself, and so at best, this attempt represents a first stab, but at worst, risks veering the discussion off course. I must also apologize for the lack of images in this final stretch. But caveats aside, and throwing caution to the wind, I'd like to advance these thoughts for discussion. My first premise would be to reframe ethical arguments on social value around new priority areas that I believe everyone can agree on. The need to build hope, security, and unity back into the world. The purpose of this is to help bridge different ethical discourses under a political lexicon and to raise greater awareness of each as one central issue that most people recognize but find difficult to act upon: the need to behave more ethically, thereby not only encouraging but facilitating us all to change our behavior today and not tomorrow. If we can agree that these themes of hope, security, and unity play a part in underpinning social value, then the next step would be how we can reframe ethical arguments around those priority areas. Too often, it feels as though we are forced into siloed specialisms that you can only tackle one at a time: that of the sustainability architect, the BAME architect, the community participation architect, and so on. However, are these not all part of the evolving role of what it is to actually be an architect? Should we not be engaged in investing ourselves in doing all of them? Should it really have to be a choice between tackling environmental issues and those of racial justice? As a society, we recognize that we need to be doing this all at once. So why is it a case of either or and not both and? Is it merely the need for branding to help clients in deciding who they want to work with? Is it because doing the right thing costs money and people need to prioritize their spend according to their institution's priorities and not those necessarily of the communities that they operate in? Can we afford to continue like this? In other words, there is so much wonderful work going on with regards to ethics in siloed areas and institutions. How can we bring people together to address this central crisis of ethics we all find ourselves in? At present, some of this work is buried in codes of conduct and third-party certifications as proof of ethical supply chains and company behavior, whilst others are regulated by statutory instruments such as planning, building control, and the law at large. In addressing the gaps in thinking, do we not need to collate what needs to be done together at a societal level and to identify the best instruments for doing so? In other industries, such as food, we recognize the need to simplify and clarify messaging to consumers so that the hard work is done for them and clearly communicated through a trusted system of badges and certification. However, ultimately, it is about the consumer being empowered and equipped with the knowledge to make ethical decisions for themselves effortlessly and at a glance. Whilst the state might specify the baseline for society, industry can also help us as individuals in striving towards higher standards, notwithstanding the risk of confusion arising from the sheer number of different types of certification, which is certainly a problem the food industry is now facing. Is it a stretch to imagine such a unifying system working across the ethical challenges we face dealing with the built environment? I imagine that the process of value engineering would look quite different if we could weigh and measure the ethical arguments against those of price and the bottom line, which of course are interwoven with affordability and therefore also questions of ethics. the two are not mutually exclusive. Hopefully, it would help demystify the cost plan and increase its utility through its reimagining. By standardizing and simplifying decision-making, would it not empower us all, rather than navigating the complex moral questions from scratch on each and every project in an often opaque manner? Can we not learn from the strengths of standardization in cutting through the confusion, whilst acknowledging someone expert will always need to be at hand to help understand the information presented and draw appropriate conclusions? Do architects, consciously or not, already take on this role in making tens, if not thousands, of ethical decisions across the course of the project, whether in specifying products and construction methods, or even in their own employment practices? Is this not part of our curriculum and training? And if not, shouldn't it be? Can and should we be expanding into this role? And shouldn't we be at the forefront of advancing discussions on ethics? So let's now return to hope. In order to have hope for the future, we know that we need to build environmentally and socially sustainable buildings. The solutions are clear, however, we have lacked the political will to implement them, despite their urgency. Sometimes these can come into conflict with one another, such as in weighing jobs and industry against their environmental cost. However, we must stop seeing these things in such binary terms, but rather continue to direct greater investment into sustainable development, the creation of new technologies and approaches, as well as in growing a greener economy and jobs therein. That much we can influence as persons responsible for the built environment. However, rather than focus on environmental issues, which I'm sure this audience is well versed in, I would like to remind us all that hope also means being inclusive. The future must include and cater for all of us, and that means having structures in place that do include and represent all of us, both as buildings, but also in the commissioning, regulating, and delivery of the built environment. In recent years, the world has been shaken to the core by movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter. We have an obligation to not only have the policies in place to deal with prejudice, but to ensure that they are acted upon. As I discussed earlier, abstract measures can become divorced from reality and often require knowledgeable persons to make sense of their meaning and weigh a design's true value and cost. This cannot happen exclusively through ad hoc consultations with a community, when lived experiences growing up within a community are so important in understanding and appreciating our different values and perspectives that should shape the environments we live in. So it goes without saying that those involved in the built environment must be representative of the wider population to tailor our policies and designs to meet the needs of the people that we serve. Not only this, but in creating inspiring environments in which to live, we must not limit this ambition to buildings and recognize that the creation of inspiring environments should also be inclusive of role models for future generations to relate to and see themselves in. We need to be much better at measuring all of this. We need transparency and accountability in everything we do. We mustn't stop at the provision of optics, the photo shoot and press release marketing the project, but really examine how wealth, and by extension welfare, gets distributed across the project, and that is something that we can in fact quantify in terms of pounds. And in this regard, we have litmus tests that, although crude, can probe the effectiveness of the ethical measures we have implemented. If we can do this, then we can all have something to look forward to. Coronavirus, but also events like Grenfell, have thrown into stark relief the endemic inequality in our society. For many, this is not new, but something they have learned to live with. We need to revisit a discussion around the base protections that we should afford everyone in society, and this needs to involve everyone and not be implemented top-down. I can't imagine that there is anyone left in the world who does not appreciate the importance of the built environment, especially in relation to their physical and mental health. We need to be more sensitive and aware in tailoring the built environment for different communities, but also individuals. Not everyone's needs are the same, and we must celebrate our cultural differences to ensure that the way we regulate the built environment is truly fit for purpose in meeting our needs and wants. Regulation is not neutral and will better serve some members of the population than others. And so we need to plan with greater cultural awareness and sensitivity for people's safety and well-being to give them security in life. After all, isn't home ownership the pursuit of such security and freedom, the freedom it affords? So as a society, should we not be first focusing on the provision of security to ring-fence people's well-being, the fundamental tenets of a welfare state? As an industry, we also need to ensure proper employment practices and to collectively ensure that we pay our collaborators properly so that they too can have security in life. Whether on the building site or within the office, social equity should not remain as something other that we speak about, but become the bedrock upon which we build our practices and profession. In the pursuit of social equity out there, we have failed to see it creep within our own walls as younger generations struggle to live. Clients too have a responsibility in dealing with these issues in a transparent manner when assessing what true value represents and where they direct their investment. We have a duty to care for the built environment, but also the people who tend to it. Coronavirus has shown that we need to ensure our built environment is future-proof and able to properly accommodate the things that life throws our way. Those with a bit more living space have been able to work from home, whilst others have struggled with childcare, struggled with work, and struggled with feeling trapped and lonely. In the pursuit of affordability and a benchmark for security, we mustn't remove the built-in contingency we need to have for when things go wrong. Small adjustments can have a huge impact, such as building in a bit more generosity into the plan to allow for an additional desk. We all now know how important an extra desk is and how the quantity, dimension, and typology of furniture can serve as a measure of our rights and quality of life. Without unpacking a discussion of minimums, as we will be here all day, I would like to make a couple of further observations. I think we can all agree that we need more tolerance in society and to treat one another with greater levels of respect and care, especially when dealing with the silent disease which is ravaging our communities. Not only is our well-being tied to the built environment, but also to one another, our communities, of which we're each members of so many. If one good thing should come of this, I hope that we have learned to appreciate our neighbours more and realise their important role in maintaining our health. As we emerge from being locked down, I hope that we not only learn to socialise again, but how to build again. In recent years, we have seen so many exciting developments in how we procure the built environment to involve communities and work with our neighbours. We have suffered a period of amnesia, and I hope that we continue to seek therapy in strengthening our resolve in procuring socially valuable environments. To sum up, if you were to take 3 things away from this talk, the first would be to reflect on the neutrality of universal measurements and who they benefit. The second is to embed ethics back into value engineering and the construction of social value. And the third is that we should be working together to consolidate disparate ethical discourses into one central issue in the development of a new ethical economy that we can rally around in wanting to do the right thing in building hope, security, and unity back into the world. That's it.